The Prime Minister said to Kerry O'Brien, "That is an absolute undertaking from us." I believe this is a sick cancer within our system. It's a cancer on our democracy. Perhaps that's what the Prime Minister's crossing out as he frantically scribbles his notes over there. But at least on this occasion, he's not running away from defending himself. But how can he defend himself? How can he defend himself? This is an absolute betrayal of a commitment that he gave not once but many times prior to the last election. Now, Mr. Speaker, not only has he betrayed the commitments that he made to the Australian people, he has clearly misled this parliament. He has clearly misled this parliament. All of us can remember last week he was asked about the impact of his great big new tax on mining, on the currency markets and on the share markets, and he said any suggestion that there was an impact on currency markets and share markets was wrong, wrong, wrong. Well, who has revealed the Prime Minister as telling a lie, 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 but none other than his own minister, the Special Minister of State, Senator Ludwig, who said, and I quote, "I further accept the Treasurer's advice that tax reform changes impact on financial markets." He went on to say, "I am satisfied that a compelling reason for an exemption exists, particularly given the nature and extent of misinformation against a backdrop of continuing market volatility." Well, Mr. Speaker, this is a Prime Minister who just cannot be trusted. He's a Prime Minister who cannot be trusted. He can't be trusted to be straight with the Australian people, and as we know this morning from Simon Benson, he can't even be trusted to be straight with Morris Yemmer, his own state Labor colleagues. He lies shamelessly. He lies shamelessly to anyone and everyone if he thinks there is an advantage in it to him. Well, Mr. Speaker, if there is a national emergency today, it is not criticism of this government which constitutes a national emergency. It's the work of this government which constitutes a national emergency. And I say this to the Australian people: if you want to stop the boats, you've got to change the government. If you want to stop the tax, you've got to change the government. If you want to restore decency to our public life, you've got to change the government. It doesn't matter how many times he gives a press conference outside a church on Sunday, nothing that he says can actually be believed.
Order. Is the motion seconded? The member for North Sydney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This comes down to trust. Mr. Speaker, this comes down to the ability of the Australian people to trust their Prime Minister.
Order.
Mr. Speaker, and it comes down to numbers, raw numbers. Numbers in the Corporations Act and the ASX
Order.
listing rules require people to tell the truth to the stock exchange and investors. So when the head of Rio and the head of BHP and the head of so many mining companies come out and say these are the real numbers, these are the impact on our balance sheet, this is the impact on our profit and loss, they have an obligation to tell the truth. It's only a shame that the government and the Prime Minister do not have the same legal obligation. And I say why, Mr. Speaker? It is because the government has sought at every point in this debate to deliberately mislead the Australian people. They've misled the Australian people about the true impact and shape of the tax. They've misled the Australian people about the numbers behind old Swanee's notes. They've misled the Australian people in the ads by deliberately excluding company tax, which has increased dramatically over the last few years. Even in question time today, the Prime Minister sought to deliberately mislead the Australian people when he said, and I quote, "Whichever way you cut the cake, whether it's on royalties, whether it's on company tax, and against all ranges of measures, the bottom line is because of the current structure of the taxation regime, the return to the Australian people via the taxation system is infinitely less than it was a decade ago." A decade ago. Mr. Speaker, the facts are that royalties a decade ago were $1.2 billion. Last year they're $7.5 billion. A decade ago company tax was $1.4 billion. Last year estimated $14 billion. Total increase of tenfold in the contribution of the mining sector, which makes the lie of the Prime Minister in question time today. But we should not be surprised. This is a Prime Minister that had all sorts of moral courage before the last election. Moral courage when he was challenged by the Australian people to reveal his innermost character. He was asked to be honest, to be fair dinkum, to be real with the Australian people. And the Australian people took him on his word. They took him on his word when he said that advertising prior to an election is a cancer on democracy. I know this man understands the real impact of cancer, as so many of us do. To use that word flippantly in relation to democracy is a significant issue, because it clearly illustrates the fact that the Prime Minister will use whatever words are available at the time to emphasise his real commitment. The problem is we don't know what his real commitment is. We don't know what his real commitment is. Does he believe in climate change? Is it truly the greatest moral, social and economic challenge of our lifetime? Are you truly a political coward if you do not act immediately to support an ETS? And are you truly engaging in supporting a cancer on democracy if you advertise just before an election? What's happened now is the government has been caught out. Last week we saw this policy was framed by Google. They went to North America and got a working paper from academics. They went to Treasury and got a draft note handed around, all to justify the mining tax, and now they're seeking through advertising, through taxpayers' money, to deliberately mislead the Australian people about the true impact of this tax. And it says a lot about the character of the Prime Minister. Anything we say on this side of the House, will never have the impact of the words of our own Prime Minister being brought back to him. Anything we say, all the commentary, everything said by a critic means nothing compared to the raw information that has come from the Prime Minister's mouth at one time and now completely denied by himself now. Mr. Speaker, he blames us for his hypocrisy. He blames us for his misleading the Australian people. He blames us for everything that has gone wrong in his life. I say to you, Prime Minister, you stand condemned. Not by us, not by the commentators. You stand condemned by the Australian people, and more importantly even than that, you stand condemned by your own words.
The question is the motion be